distinguished speakers. We will go from Orla Feely, the President for Research, Innovation and Impact of the University College Dublin, talking about university-industry collaboration factors for success, to Stockholm University, another important UNICA member, talking about building bridges within university and cooperating with industry. Francois Boussy, the Vice Rector for Research of the University of Lausanne, will actually give us some ideas and examples from a non-technological university. Let me underline a very important topic today, also the cooperation with industry, not only in the field of STEM, but also SSH, the Social Sciences and Humanities, with the talk by Joanna Galleron, a professor of French literature and digital humanities. And then also, I think very important today is the talk by Christophe Huneau from the University of Luxembourg on knowledge transfer magics. And then last but not least, we will have a case from the Autónoma de Madrid on Javier Ortega Garcia about knowledge generation and technological transfer. But before starting this panel, which will be chaired by Professor Jonathan Sackel, Vice Principal of the University of Edinburgh, we will have a keynote speech by Christian Suojanen. He's a CEO of the Broadreach Global LLC based in the USA, who will give a talk about innovation models in academia. Christian is a business and innovation advisor in the biotech, health, and pharma sectors, with 20 years of experience in strategic advisory, business creation, development, and operational experience. His experience includes business strategy, financing, and business development for startup and growth companies. He founded a leading international biotech and health-focused platform and organized several summits attended by innovation representatives from leading medical and life sciences universities and institutes worldwide, and hosted by organizations such as NIH, Wellcome Trust, and Institut Pasteur. So it's a pleasure now to leave the floor to Christian for his speech.
Thank you, Luciano. And I realize when I read it back, that biography sounds longer than I intended. The one comment I would make is that with the summits that we ran in the past, we did over 30 of them in 23 countries, cities around the world. So on pretty much any region where you have a major biotech hotspot, we were there and brought in the other organizations in the country or in the region. I'm doing something different these days since I've been moved back to the US for family reasons, but I'm happy to be here. A lot of our activities over the years have been in Europe. That's where I spent most of my career, doing a turnaround of a European biotech federation and launching the first initiative, which was actually put together at the request of the European Venture Capital Association, which has since changed its name, and the European Commission and FPA and Europa Bio, who were looking back before anybody was talking about technology transfer at why it was such a challenge to take world-class European research and make sure that it would be properly exploited, as the term was used, or utilized, that there was some benefit coming from the research when there was a basis for it. So I'll share my screen. If you can let me know if you can see this. Oh, pardon me, it's gone back to the beginning. So, all right. Is that showing? If somebody can just nod, one of the other speakers?
Yes, yes,
yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Broadreach Global is a new company. As I mentioned, I've moved back to the US. So as an American, it doesn't make sense to try to maintain a company in Europe while I'm not resident there. But the track record of what we're doing goes back 10 years, and biotech sector business development and finance 20 years, most of which in Europe. So I've put our mission statement here. I won't read the whole thing out. You can see that. You'll see the slides after. But basically we do believe in the power of innovation to impact the world in a positive way. We also recognize that the challenges to innovation are often not only the science itself, they are other factors, and access to expertise, access to the right human capital, the investors, the strategic partners, and the mentoring needed to achieve.
Excuse me, Christian, by mistake, you muted yourself. I just asked. Yes, it's working now.
Sorry, that was not me.
No problem.
It did it itself. So we seek to help whether companies or organizations put the right ingredients in place to facilitate innovation. What I would like to say is, because you're all at universities that have technology transfer, licensing, innovation, or commercialization offices, we are not a technology transfer company. We are not the company that comes in and says, we'll do your tech transfer for you, or we'll go through your portfolio and we will pick up a company. We work with technology transfer, as we do with early stage companies and with health systems and governments. But our focus is on identifying the value proposition, what is there, what is the core competence, and then engaging, building the right strategy, and then executing that strategy to engage with industry, investors, and partners. And that can be through strategy, through carrying out the business development ourselves, through training and education or coaching, as well as international advisory boards, which is something that we believe and have seen can have quite a significant impact. I apologize, something is going wrong with the slide deck here. There we go. So this is a simple agenda. I won't read through it. Each of these is in usually one slide, in some cases 2 or 3, but it's a relatively short presentation. Why do we innovate? So something we used to hear in various ways was, who cares about innovation? I just want to do my research. I think we've all heard this. Fortunately, it's less typical now than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And I think when we hear this, people get frustrated, but it's important to note that this is not necessarily coming from a negative perspective or view. Usually it's coming from perhaps misguided but well-intentioned feeling. Some researchers consider a focus on innovation as nothing but red tape and extra work, and it detracts from the potential of their science. Some clinicians feel that it prioritizes profit over patients. And there are interesting stories there, and I'm sure any of you in the health space, biotech and pharma space have seen this. But I've seen examples where we've had exactly this view from a clinician, and it took a series of conversations with a number of people over months before that clinician who really wanted to help patients understood that actually following some basic innovation processes was the only way to ensure that he could have that impact. So it's not necessarily about money, and of course there are many ways to manage that. This highlights the need for dialogue and the need to develop a culture of innovation at an institution, in a system, in a region. There's a view I heard years ago, and I'm paraphrasing, and it was along the lines of, because government and society are no longer interested to fund research, if the potential for exploitation of that research isn't going to be even explored. Another one was because insert the requirement, whether national law, the institutional policy, the university charter says you have to. These may be technically true to some extent and in some cases, but they're usually not the best ways to approach a conversation. So I think what I like to look at are the societal challenges. If we recognize that funding is constrained, there is less public funding available in many cases, and not all countries have seen a COVID bump in funding. Some have, but many quite the opposite in terms of research funding. And the current allocations in some countries may or may not survive future election cycles. There are competing demands. Many of these are very legitimate societal demands for the same resources. And then if we consider the pressures, population growth, lifestyle, pollution, climate change, and other factors are compounding the pain. They don't just compete for the resources, but they are increasing the size and scope of the problem. So this increases the need for innovation, but also the competition for limited public funding. Without ignoring the crucial importance of fundamental research, let's be clear, this is not my space. I'm not at a university. I'm not an academic. 20 years ago, I was an economist. Probably I'm not anymore. But fundamental research is important. So this presentation is not dealing with that. It's not an argument that we should not have fundamental research. It is a view on why innovation is important, and then we'll get to the innovation models and engaging with industry. So innovation offers potential to address major societal problems. Considering the public funding, it seems reasonable to request some attention to innovation and the potential use and beneficial use of results. It provides a sound rationale for the allocation of resources to research and innovation, and it offers the potential to contribute funding for additional research. I think we should be clear here. Sometimes it leads to unreasonable expectations when universities or institutes first launch technology transfer offices or organizations. They expect it's going to start generating revenues at an unreasonable level and in an unreasonably short period of time. And there is often not a clear understanding of total inputs versus outputs in terms of whether technology transfer and innovation can actually be a revenue generating net operation in most cases. So I think it's important to be very realistic about the limits of this, but it can contribute somewhat. And of course, for the researchers, the faculty, it can generate career benefit, recognition, and impact on matters that researchers and clinicians are passionate about. If they do want to help those patients, if they do want to move the state of the art of science forward, innovation is a good way to have that impact. So if we look at traditional approaches in managing innovation, academia, industry innovation, perhaps the most traditional has been sponsored research, which is essentially research as a service, leveraging the scientific subject matter expertise. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a major driver of research at many institutions, and in many, even institutions with large and effective tech transfer and commercialization offices, it brings in more revenue than the technology transfer and licensing. So that is important to note. Historically, though, the upside has traditionally been somewhat limited for the researchers and their institutions. You're paid to do the research, therefore it's not the same degree of risk share, therefore ownership and the upside is not usually the same. That does vary, but traditionally in a very general sense. Technology transfer, and I'm going to go through the traditional approaches very quickly because I think everybody knows them to some extent. So the commercialization of intellectual property or assets through licensing to industry, it can be very effective. However, like anything else, it has its challenges, and it can often lead to technology push approaches, where you have an innovation, you have some intellectual property, it seems valuable, so you need to find a use for it, you need to find a demand for it. So you're trying to fit a solution to demand that exists in the market, rather than taking a market need, demand-driven approach and innovating to address that. Incubators and accelerators came a little bit later, and the approach is to support the further development of innovations until they reach an inflection point where commercialization or exploitation is feasible. These can be very effective, but it's important to say they often face the challenges of seed funds and early stage funds, in that there is insufficient capital to finance all the way through to the necessary inflection point without being completely diluted, so they're unsustainable. And they often face a shortage of human capital in the appropriate sector. I would say sectors, because many incubators are not very niche in one very specific area, for example, of biopharma or digital health, which we'll talk about in a moment, and the industry experience that goes with that. All of the traditional approaches can work, but they all have challenges. So identifying the right approach for the case in question and adapting the model to the realities on the ground is the core challenge. There's an old H.L. Mencken quote. He had some great quotes, but I think the one that's appropriate here is, for every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Why did I put this here? So if I think back over 10 or 20 years, the number of times I've met somebody from an institution or a tech transfer office who has a solution, they're going to raise a fund, or they're going to launch an incubator, and that's going to solve everything. Maybe, but it really depends on if that solution is addressing the actual challenges that face the institutions, or region in question. If there's no existing culture of innovation, an accelerator is not the right solution, at least initially. Maybe it's a great step down the road, but it's not the first step. If there's no experienced management from the targeted industry sector, and by which I mean entrepreneurial management, then a fund is very unlikely to succeed until that is addressed. If there is no pharmaceutical or med tech R&D present in the region, then going to local industry for sponsored research or seed funding probably won't yield the right results. There are exceptions in some regions. Some universities and consortia have been extremely creative in going to companies in the food and agriculture sector or in the mining sector and saying, this life sciences biotech research, although we're focused on the medical side in this case, could be applied to your problems and to your industry. So there are successes, but it takes adaptation. The key is finding a solution that addresses the problems that exist or the challenges and hurdles that exist locally. So in new models, we've seen, in recent years, we've seen a bunch of new models and novel approaches, some of them very successful, others not. I'm not necessarily recommending each of these models. I'm just providing a few examples because some have been more successful than others. So if we look, maybe one of the first has been regional hubs, with the concept that we can integrate multiple stakeholders, whether universities or research clinics in a country or a region, to generate critical mass that garners more interest from industry and implements economies of scale, for example, in external business development and industry engagement. So if we look, there are examples in Europe, and this may not be the best example, but the SATs in France, and I realize that's not necessarily the freshest example, and also the hubs in Chile. These approaches have merit, and they can work depending on the given case. But aligning interests and commitment is absolutely crucial. It's also something that has rarely worked very well when imposed from the top down. This is not something that it's easy for a government to impose unless they're providing real incentives that do align interests and get engagement and commitment. Sector-specific accelerators. So I alluded to this a moment ago. Aggregating industry and investor interest across a specific sector and providing coaching and mentoring to winners or inductees from a deep pool of engaged experts and external counsel to give them advice, to coach them, to mentor them, and to enable rapid scaling. There are some great examples of this. Probably the most successful are in the digital health field. And health IT. So Rock Health, HealthBox, the New York Digital Health Accelerator, they've been able to aggregate industry and investors, serial entrepreneurs, angel investors from the sector, and multiple advisory organizations, all to participate in coaching, mentoring, business case, business models, scale up, etc. So these have been quite effective. Hospital and health system-based venture funds, some work, some don't. The more successful ones have focused on investment into clinical research center spinouts or medical research center spinouts that address specific hospital or health system needs. So those coming from, in the US, academic medical centers, in Europe from research clinics, enabling direct customer mentoring from the hospitals and health systems, and rapid scale up and the ability to meet customers. Essentially, in addition to the funding and the advisory and the expertise, they are being coached and mentored directly by their potential clients, and they're developing a solution that fits the needs so that if it does work and reaches that point, it can really take off. Now, I should say in Europe, there are a number of regional health systems that have been doing things along these lines. They exist in Spain, they exist in Germany, I'm sure they exist elsewhere. I'm not familiar with all of them. It can be a very good model. There's one I'd like to highlight. It's not the only one, but I think it's about 5 years old now. And we used to look, and I used to see at the meetings we'd run around the world, how do we get one of these $100 million strategic collaborations with Pfizer at our institute, like University X did. The reality is most universities are not going to be in a position where one big pharma wants to put, 100 million or 20 million or 50 million over a few years into a collaboration only with them and a long-term strategic collaboration. So if we look at New York, we see the TRI-TDI, or the Tri-Institutional Therapeutics Discovery Institute, where Memorial Sloan Kettering came together with the Rockefeller University and Weill Cornell Medical, and they launched the TDI collaboration with Takeda to bridge the gap between academic discovery and industry quality drug development. They also had a VC involved. I believe it was Bay City initially. And they then later down the road spun out Bridge Medicine with backing from Bay City and Deerfield. Deerfield's a major US VC fund. And Bridge Medicines is now part of the TRI-TDI consortia. Why is this interesting? There's a few reasons, but a multi-institution collaboration increases the value offering. There is, assuming these organizations have complementary expertise in the same area or in specific areas, which together provide a better value offering. They're not just an ad hoc mix. This is a model which can engage interest from industry and investors. It also addresses very effectively one of the major concern of industry partners, and as a result of that, to investors, and that is trust. And I'm going to come back to that. It's a bigger issue than most of us think. So often in engaging with industry, the outreach starts when there's an asset or an IP which the institution or their tech transfer and licensing office would like to partner or license. In my view, this is far too late for a number. I mean, I understand why it happens, but it's too late. There are massive missed opportunities, and it is a setback. Most obviously, it results in technology push. You've developed an asset before really being engaged with the industry partners that you want to license it to, or you would already have been in touch with them. So there is not really a demand-driven approach. Luciano, 2 minutes, and I'll. I was just looking at my watch. Sorry.
Thank you.
Successful models engage with the market and customer early on to understand what they need to get their feedback on the development path and outcomes to enable a deal. It also builds relationships so that you're not only calling when you need something from the industry partner. They actually know you. They're more likely to open and read your emails in the first place, and then there's a rapport. It builds institutional understanding, the culture of each institution in the process, and lack of this can derail a potential collaboration or kill an existing one. And most importantly, it builds trust. So there are many reasons why deals with industry are challenging, but insufficient trust is high on the list. Let's put it this way. It's not personal, it's not malicious, but industry does not really trust academia. They don't think academia is dishonest or manipulative. They just, in the life sciences, biopharma space, do not trust the results of academic experiments. And it's been shown several times that in the majority of cases, they cannot be replicated outside of the academic's lab. So statistically speaking, they're right to be cautious. For innovation in ecosystems, there are three key ingredients that rarely converge: science, money, people. Science is the most readily available in most regions and institutes that want to become innovation centers. Money is a challenge, but a number of regions have it. People is the rarest, the most important, and the most underestimated. Human capital, pools of entrepreneurial and management talent. In innovation and regional development theory, these would be called mediators. But it is what differentiates hotspots like Boston and the Bay Area from other regions with equally world-class science and excellent access to capital. You can see the effect in regions like Copenhagen and London, Cambridge, where growing pools of talented management have really had a knock-on effect, and in a positive way. It's a virtuous circle or cycle. Conversely, you can see regions which were major pharma industry zones in the US, which really lost out to places like Boston, which 20 years ago did not have a lot of pharma. Very realistically, we think of it as being, sort of the center of the East Coast of the US anyway, and to some extent a major center in the world. 20 years ago, that was not the case. I'm from Boston. I love it, but we have to be honest. You need all three. And sometimes you can use one to solve the other. You can use the Singapore, or currently the Chinese approach of capital to attract people, or with people, you can solve trust issues with industry and attract capital. So which model is best? I'm going to wrap up. I'm sure this is going to go very, very quickly. All the models have strengths and weaknesses. They need to be applied to the situation of the institution or ecosystem they are applied to. So let's assume the science is there. Then you need capital and you need human capital. If the solution being designed is not addressing the actual problem, what you're missing or what needs to be strengthened, it's not going to be very effective. It might have some effect, but if it does not address the fundamental challenge or challenges, then it probably won't work. Sometimes, if the challenge is systemic, like a disincentive to investors, then the solution may be lobbying for policy reform at a government level. It may be, if the challenge is at the institution, it may be agreeing with administration, a new approach, a new legal entity affiliated with the university or institute, but we have to address the challenges. If it's a lack of a culture of innovation, then this can be addressed either long-term through the development of this, or short-term through interventions. So it always depends on the case on the ground. Okay, I've sort of run through this already, but what is needed at any institution or for success in engaging with industry is a culture of innovation, organizational commitment, a clear strategy and approach, and stakeholder buy-in. It's not a build it and they will come situation. So it's important to assess each of these carefully and then build a model for engaging with industry, which ensures each of these are in place and then addresses the fundamental ingredients of science, money, and people, and making sure those are in place. Okay, one last thing I'd like to leave you by. This is not a sales advertisement. This is a project we're running. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. It's a global partnering platform in the life sciences space, and it is no cost for university innovation and technology transfer offices and spinouts. So it's, again, not a sales offer, but something that might help in this regard. And I'll be happy when we get to questions to address any of these issues in a bit more detail.
So